So, we were talking about the hunter gatherers, and there is a lot to talk about them. I will probably talk about them a lot of times. But now let's go back to it from a different approach. Now we can look again at relations, how relationships could have happened in the hunter gatherer phase. You know what I mean? We understood already that women had a very more important role in survival. You know what I mean? Women were very fundamental to life, and so they were very capable beings, and they still are. Much more capable than the men, actually, if you think so, with the tools that they have to survive. But the thing is that when we look at relationships back then, what anthropology and archaeology shows us is that though these hunter-gatherers, they probably used to live in groups, walking around the earth. In the groups were made of about 100, 150 persons. 50, 100, 150 human beings walking together. And in this group of 100 people or so, they probably had relationships in groups. You know what I mean? They weren't this thing of monogamy, polygamy, or whatever. We didn't have, probably these concepts would not apply because the relationships would be more fluid, probably, but naturally, because they will be together in the movement. The way of observing themselves in relationships probably was very different than we have today, since we probably will understand that the ego back then was much more integrated. You know what I mean? Was more serene in its expressions. But the thing is that concepts like we have today, like for genders and for standards for relationships in culture and society, those concepts, they seem so ignorant and small, because when we look back at the hunter gatherer, they would have these very open relations, in this group of affection and friendship at the same time, with embracing love. They would be all happy together. Of course, they would have problems surviving and all that, but since they were walking all the time, they were in movement, they were connected with nature, they would have a much more, a deeper experience with the world, with themselves. That is something to think about, because we lost that. We lost that, when we have to acknowledge that. We lost that capacity to be free of concepts, of definitions, to just be humans. Of course, we can't go back to that state of being, but we can take some lessons. We can understand how small are those concepts that we developed to scrutinize society, to divide society. This selfish understanding of reality, because the individual, of course, is very important. He is the individual, but consciousness embraces all beings. For example, the biological differences of beings are just details. You know what I mean? Because the expression itself, for example, the complexity of personalities of the human beings and so on, it's the proof that everything is much more complex and large, and much larger than we can understand. So we should step back from concepts and think about humans from a lighter standpoint. So we can see and find in ourselves the strength and the wisdom to change the world we're in. That's good to think about, because when we look back to the hunter gatherers, I love to go back to them, because I wasn't there, but we are the same. We are humans, and we are walking on earth, and we can change our perspectives. Since we've learned that women is much more important than we thought to survival, we can understand that probably the way they related to themselves and with and to others, the way they established their relationships would be much more, it would be much healthier than the ones we have today. More peaceful, respectful relationships. And at the same time, they would have free love, for example. Of course we can't experience that love, that specific experience, but we can think about it and put ourselves in that situation and think how we can change our reality and how we can be lighter, how we can be better. Not better than others, but better for others and for ourselves. You know what I mean? Because relations are everything. We are always in connection. We are all connected. After all, everything is mandala, and love is the answer.